So thank you all for being here today for this presentation. Panel discussion really talking about some of the effects of the Career Pathways Initiative that we have been having here at Xavier for several years now. And specifically what we're going to be talking about actually in this session, and then we're going to have a second session in April. That'll give you a little preview for, both focusing on the idea of collaboration. And if you're not too familiar with CPI and the Career Pathways Initiative, the idea is to find ways to incorporate what we call 21st century skills into the classroom. That's things like written and oral communication, technology skills, but it's also things like teamwork and collaboration, global literacy and awareness, right? And so many of us were able to get funding to kind of learn how to incorporate some of those skills into our classes. And so what we wanted to focus on this semester a little bit was talking about ways we thought about collaboration not as just a kind of a extra little bit of work, right? Or something we have students do because they need to do it, but something that we actually kind of teach them in the classroom, a skill that we actually teach as a part of our classes. So today's presentation is really going to kind of focus on some of the small group work that can take place in the classroom as a way to teach students how to kind of work in a team, to collaborate, to solve problems, to find solutions and such. And then the second presentation that I'm kind of tentatively calling Projects and Problems, we're going to talk about some larger scale collaborative projects that were done in the classroom. That's going to be, right now it's going to be me and Joe Drexler-Dreiss from Theology talking about kind of semester-long group projects that we had, because there's always obviously some dynamics that change from kind of the small-scale projects to these large-scale projects. But that's a little bit of preview. So let me jump back real quickly. And so today we're going to hear a little bit from Dr. Stassi DiMaggio from the chemistry department and Dr. Beth Manley from the history department, talking about ways they incorporated some of these ideas into their classes recently. And I'm going to apologize right now, because at least up here on the North Shore, we're starting to get some of this weather coming through. I don't know if it's quite hit the South Shore quite yet, but it's getting pretty windy and noisy here on my roof. So if there's too much background noise, just let me know. I think with that, I'm just going to hand it over, and maybe we could hear from Stassi a little bit first about the kind of class that you incorporated this in, how you went about doing it, changes you made, challenges you faced, and such.
Sure. I apologize because I'm melting. It's 81 degrees in my office here. So when something's broken, it's really hot. So please forgive me. So I'll tell you that the way that I incorporated this was not any sort of groundbreaking, earth-shattering novel way. Most of my classes are these large 80 to 100 student organic lectures. We do these little separate drill sessions. That's all Q&A and testing. But the class I incorporated this is the senior level elective I teach. It's medicinal chemistry. It's actually called drug design and synthesis. And it's a delightful change because it's usually 15 to 20 students, and we actually can do more discussion-based collaborative projects. So I started incorporating this a couple of years ago through the CPI grant, kind of two things. There were a lot of changes made in the course. One of was converting it to sort of a flipped classroom style. So, I mean, I couldn't imagine listening, to me can't be boring at some point. So really, I thought was much nicer to have a lot more discussion. And then with the feedback from the students, I think Jay even did a mid-course review for it. So they have the notes, and there are sort of embedded thought questions throughout the notes. And so the students are broken up into groups, and we come to class having all read the notes. We'll kind of briefly go through and answer any questions that they have, and then get into the thought questions. Some of them are more black and white. There's kind of a real answer, but some of them have multiple correct answers, or some of them are even opinion-based. And so how we do it is we'll pause, they'll kind of talk in their groups, decide, what their group answer is, and then everybody will share. And, some groups will say, oh, we didn't think about that, or well, we disagree for this reason. But then at the end of the day, they'll all sort of upload as a group their answers to the discussion board. So when they go back and study and review the class, they know what their group answer was, but they could also see other answers. And like I said, sometimes there's kind of a correct answer and they can see, oh yeah, I forgot we missed that part. And sometimes it's just different aspects of the same thing. And then last semester, I taught that class completely online. And so that group work was kind of converted into like the breakout room Zoom things, which I was a little worried about because that doesn't always go so well. But they really did a great job. I mean, they're seniors and this is an elective course, so that's helpful. But that's kind of how we did it. And then we've even expanded this sort of group discussion work. They do a lot of design, like drug analog design, which there's a gazillion correct answers to, and we've started incorporating this discussion into analog design, whereas students, even though they're kind of individually designing an analog, they'll share the approach they took to accomplish whatever pharmacokinetic profile we were trying to accomplish, and then they can, we could say, oh, all of you guys kind of handled this problem this way, 4 different ways of, decreasing the CH skeleton, or you guys all handled it this way, 5 different ways of changing polarities or whatever. And so then they kind of, I don't know, it's nice that they can see how, that the others approached it different, or some people approached it the same. And then we've then expanded this group collaboration to our 2 end of year discussions, which is we talk about IP law, and we give them case studies in IP law about that were intellectual property challenges that went before the USPTO and the courts, like debates over who owned the patent, and they try to figure it out, and they actually do pretty well. And then we do an ethics discussion at the end, and typically we have someone from philosophy come and moderate that. So that's, I mean, like I said, it's not novel, but it's just small discussion groups, but it's sort of built into where it started was just flipped classroom questions to even their individual projects. If you were working for Pfizer, you would be working on a big team of people all trying to make drug analogs or whatever they're doing. Yeah, so that's it.
Absolutely, that's great. And again, that's one of the, kind of the guiding force behind all of this initiative is this idea that whatever career path the students go into, the idea of collaboration is going to most likely be a critical thing, and more and more the research shows that a lot of graduates kind of get into these jobs and they don't have much experience. Did you have to do, and I know you were dealing with seniors in particular, did you have to do a lot of or any prep work with them kind of ahead of time to kind of make sure the groups functioned the way that they needed to
so the first year I kind of anticipated maybe getting this funding or not, but I wanted to try it anyway. And since I only teach this course once a year, about halfway through the semester, we tried it. And that was the semester you came, and they did not like it because we started this semester the traditional way and they didn't like the change. And so the next year, we just started the semester that way. I didn't use the word flipped classroom upon your recommendation, and let them choose their own groups. It was just kind of based on where they were sitting, and they kept that group. And what I found was we've always done the group discussion, the IP law and the ethics, but this year was so great because they had a group all year, so they were just used to, I don't know, I think they kind of bonded more as a class. And so that discussion at the end of the year was really robust. And then when they were working on the case studies, they were like high-fiving each other almost, when I did the Zoom, I just did the random assignment the first day, and that was who they were. And so other than that, no, but ideally they would just kind of pick their own groups, and that, yeah. I think there's pros and cons to each, but
yeah. Thank you. So let's hear a little bit from then Beth, and then we'll kind of come back and I think maybe do some more kind of questions about both how they went. So Beth, again, can you talk a little bit about the class you did this in, kind of challenges you faced and those sort of things.
Yeah, so I think Stassi and I were in the same, it was the first year, 2019, 2020. And I had also kind of started re-envisioning a class that then I thought, oh, well, this is perfect for CPI. The class is Revolutions in Modern History, which I teach from a Latin American and Caribbean perspective, because that's what I do. And before the grant had even started, I had instituted a sort of project idea framing kind of concept for the class that I was calling Revolutionary Lives. And it was based on a Latin American historian at Oberlin that was the advisor to my advisor. And what he did was to have students take on these avatars to try to understand what it is like to live. His was specifically military dictatorships in the Southern Cone that disappeared and tortured and killed thousands upon thousands of people. And he made the students assume both resistor and the involved, right? And he did it slightly differently. His was completely fictionalized and demanded a lot of kind of background information and a lot of things that our students wouldn't necessarily have, right? A lot of his students were Latin American history majors and they had taken other classes. And so I was envisioning this class as an X-core. So not only sort of our history students who don't get a ton of background in Latin American history, for example, but students who maybe had one history class before, for whom this would be a completely new thing. And so I decided to divide the whole class into 3 groups based on 3 different revolutions. So there was the Mexico group, the Cuba group, and the Chile group, right? And so at the very beginning of the semester, the students had to pick what country they wanted to be in, which allowed them to have some sort of autonomy over the group that they went into, but without necessarily knowing who that, that in many ways it still became very random based on what, of course they all wanted Cuba. And we had to kind of work that out and convince them that Mexico and Chile were equally interesting and engaging. And then over the course of the semester, and maybe I should have been in the other group because it was a big semester long project. They had a couple of different tasks. One was to assume a Revolutionary Lives character, a historical character who had actually lived, but for which there wasn't a ton of historical information, and they had to write a journal every week, putting entries in which they had to do some research on this person, but they also had to do some creative fictional writing where they had to kind of assume that identity. But then the group work came in the other 2 parts of the kind of overall thing, where they were working as a group to come up with a presentation on their country's revolution. So whoever was in Mexico, or whoever was in Cuba, or whoever was in Chile had to work together to come up with a final presentation and poster for festival. Well, it was assumed for Festival of Scholars, that they would present collectively as a group. And so in every class, there were a bunch of different group activities that I did. Some of them were discussion based on, what they had written in their journals and sharing the lives of these people that they were kind of creating, both from historical documents and from their own heads, to kind of talk around what was happening in their, respective revolution. Some of it was to work together to understand the readings that they'd been given for that week. Some of it was in a presentation leadership style where the group had to lead discussion on that week's, content material. And then other things were related to the final project. So as groups, they had to come up with what the rubric should be for the final presentation and the poster. As groups, they had to start working to create an annotated bibliography of sources for their revolution. As groups, they had to ultimately create these posters. Last spring, obviously, things got really kind of upended. And so I relied really heavily on the breakout groups and Google Docs for them to, I kind of dropped the final poster. I ended up dropping the final poster and some of the final work, but they worked together to create a more robust annotated bibliography. And I used those breakout groups and would kind of pop into them to see how they were doing on working through those annotations and building this essentially library of knowledge. And I can go into detail in any of those different kinds of group work that they did in class. I will definitely say that I did group work as an undergrad. And so I've really struggled to try to make this the kind of group work that I wouldn't hate, but I am, very cognizant of the ways in which not incorporating group work does a disservice, right? And that I often find a lot of my students that are really good at teaching, right, as a process of this, and they find that out too. And so there are many benefits, and I think there's a lot of ways to mitigate some of the problems with students that don't do the work, or groups that are kind of uneven skill and knowledge wise that I've implemented in some of the different iterations of that. But I'll stop there.
Thank you. But I think that would be great. I think that's a great question, and something I was thinking about, both in terms of kind of normal classroom setting with small group work, right? In terms of making sure that the groups are functioning well, and then adding that additional challenge of trying to do it remotely, where if they're in the breakout rooms, you can't even really kind of eavesdrop, right? You can't keep an eye on things to make sure people are involved. So do you all have some advice or suggestions, or ways that you've kind of gone about to make sure that the groups function effectively and equitably? I'll just kind of open it up there.
I do eavesdrop or not eavesdrop. I drop in, right? In the same way that I would in a classroom, where I make them put their chairs together and, physically move to create a group, and will come and then put a chair in their group. I do the same with the breakout groups. And I'll physically drop into each one of them, and I'll be there for a little bit, and then I'll go to another one, and I'll go to another one. But I also try to set things within, so if they're in a breakout group or in a physical group and they have a task, right? So they have to complete writing the list of what the sources are going to be. I try to say, okay, so when are you all meeting to complete this work, right? And make sure, and that's sort of an element of the flipped, right? That in the classroom, they decide when and where that meeting time is, right? That they have it, so that if they're lacking in the leadership that it takes to sort of plan a meeting, which we all know is probably one of the hardest things that we ever do, that is done, and that it's on them if they don't do the meeting, but that it's set and has kind of that was one of the things that I found really helpful.
I do the same thing. I drop in, and it's a little clunky, and it takes a lot of time, to get in and get out of the next rooms. But I do drop in and just it's kind of, do you have any questions? Are you stuck? And usually, if they're like, hey, we're doing well, we're moving on, it's fine. But sometimes it's like, well, we don't know where to start. And then I take advantage of that function where you can broadcast a message to everybody. And okay, look, I see everybody struggling here. Don't forget that these are the things you want to accomplish in the next 10 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever it is. Yeah. I mean, I do announce it though too. I don't like join it secretly. I do like Beth. I'm here. So whenever you're talking about that you don't want me to hear, right.
But also clear tasks, right? You are supposed to be doing X and Y broadcasted or repeated or put on the board or however we're doing it. Yeah. I also feel like having them create the rubrics, and this didn't happen this spring, but it happened the previous spring. Having them create the rubrics for the final two, both the presentation and the poster, seemed to create more buy-in in the group work because they had decided, so they decided in small groups, and then we merged all those to have a compromised document. I felt like there was a little bit more buy-in in those final projects and that collective work because they had decided what the requirement, or not the requirements per se, but the kind of weightedness of it.
Yeah, excellent. Well, one thing I was thinking about when you were talking about that was having them, that they have to meet outside of class as well. And again, we talk about these 21st century skills, workplace skills, or whatever. And yeah, scheduling meetings is is a skill into itself that you need to, a lot of us still kind of struggle with. So.
Yeah.
Other than the difficulties of the challenges of kind of, like we said, eavesdropping and dropping in, have you found other problems or been able to overcome any problems with the switch to remote and the use of breakout rooms and stuff like that? Or was it as smooth as, some of us say it should be?
I mean, for my class, I think the awkwardness was that they don't necessarily know each other, and they've never met each other, and they keep their cameras off. And I don't force people to turn their cameras on. I mean, I know some of my students were catching their internet in parking lots and stuff. That's cool. But I think that was the biggest challenge, is that they had never met. In some cases. Now, they were seniors, so there was a lot of people who knew each other. They were all senior chemistry majors, but that wasn't universally true. And I imagine that if they're not seniors and all the same majors, like an X-Corps, that would be a much bigger challenge.
So in that way, this semester was almost more of a challenge than like last semester, at least in that, because at least last spring, they had some time in the classroom together before we went remote, whereas for many of us this semester it's 100%. Mm-hmm. Okay, I hadn't thought about that.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that and this comes from my hatred of great group work, which is that one person ends up doing a lion's share of the work, or that your grade will suffer as a result of one person not doing the work, which I was particularly attentive to in the spring, and in my crazed 2 weeks of rewriting every single syllabus that I had to account for moving online because I'm a crazy person. I was like, how am I going to do this? Because I'm not really seeing, I can't sort of have a handle on the dynamics as much in this scenario. And so one of the things I did is I made a rubric that was kind of adjustable. So in the annotated bibliographies, there was a number of books that they had to have, but I also sort of said, this is based on 4 or 5, or I can't remember, per person, right? So if you have a person who has clearly dropped out, right, whether that was for legitimate, for whatever reasons, right, whether that was illness or some other thing, I was able to take that into account and say, instead of 20, you actually only needed to have. And I had them, in this case, kind of initial, right, that they worked together, but each of the annotations had an initial. So I had a better handle and an ability to kind of track who did what, how. Obviously, it all turned out better if they edited each other. And that was part of the final grade, but I also could see kind of individual contributions.
Excellent. I was in the process of typing my question, but
Russell, go ahead.
Just ask it. Okay, so just a little background. I teach in pharmacy, and so I incorporated this semester group work in one of my experiential courses. So it's a very small group. It's only 4 students, and they come to clinic every once in a while to get kind of that practical experience. but I also have them do topic discussion. So tell me about this disease state that you learned your second year. And so the group work that I started is I have them prepare for the topic discussion on their own. So they go through the pathophysiology, how you treat the disease, any counseling information. So I have them work together to do that presentation. And then I give them kind of clinical pearls that I would ask, correct any misinformation. So my question is, since this is my first semester doing it this way, I haven't heard any bad news or anyone not pulling their weight. So I guess my question is no news good news, or should I incorporate some type of evaluation of your team members? It's a little different because it is a pass-fail course, so I don't have to worry about A, B, C. But I'm just wondering, should I just think good news, no news is good news, or should I incorporate some type of team member evaluation?
I mean, my tendency is that if no one's complaining to you, they're probably doing okay. But are you ever doing any of this group work during class time?
So I only meet with this, since it is experiential, we kind of set our own schedule. So they come, we meet maybe once every 2 weeks. So a lot of the work is done outside, and then they come to the clinic, and then we'll do a presentation day. So I meet them maybe once a week, every other week sometimes. So there's no set class time, I guess.
Right.
They're turning in everything okay, and when they're presenting, everyone's contributing. So I'm just hoping no news is good news. I don't know.
That seems like it is working, but I would also say it's not a bad idea. Like if you have a bigger class or you have a different kind of class, that you maybe like almost like a mid-course review where you have them evaluate each other and say, this is anonymous. You could do some sort of poll if you meet with them virtually at any point and be like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about your teammates? And see what you get.
Yeah, that's a good idea of doing something anonymous, like on our presentation days. And then it can help them kind of self-reflect too. Maybe I'll have them self-reflect on their performance as well.
Right.
As
and how would you grade yourself as a teammate?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's less about, I know who your team is, and just more of how people felt in general. And they might feel a little more comfortable.
You could also ask them what they think their best attribute as a team member is, and what that would be really interesting to see what they say.
Yeah, that's good too.
I think you Beth and Stassi both talked about being real clear with the tasks with any of this kind of group stuff, which is this is what you as a group need to accomplish. Do either of you or anybody really try to use also kind of designations of you've got this role and you've got this role, or do you just give them the roles and kind of say somebody needs to be a leader, somebody needs to be kind of the writer or something like that? Do you find that giving roles or having them select roles helps with that kind of issue also?
I mean, for ours, the task was discuss and answer the question, but every chapter, someone else was in charge of typing up the group's answers and uploading it to the discussion board. And I just would say, okay, this week it's you, and then next chapter it's this person, But other than that, there were no specific roles other than to contribute to the discussion and decide on an answer. Yeah.
In my intro, history classes, women in world history and human rights in world history, I regularly put them in groups, and this is outside of CPI, but I'll often move, this isn't when we're in physical form, I'll move the chairs into spaces before they even get into the room. And then at the beginning of the semester though, I was like, oh, Dr. Manley, group work. But then they get excited towards the end of it. And sometimes I'll even put on the chairs, like the different roles, right? There's always someone who's the historian or the scribe. There's always someone who is the leader. There may be, different, depending on the activity, different kind of roles. And I don't always give them, but I do sort of fairly consistently over the semester have activities that have specific roles, that sometimes I let them choose, sometimes I assign, and try to mix it up, because if you let them pick, they'll rely on the same people that did the work all the time. But if you make sure that there's a little bit of spontaneity to that, they can't always rely on having the smart person that they sit next to give all the answers.
Yeah. I've tried both. I've done it where I've just said, here's the roles that need to be fulfilled within the group, and you all pick. I have tried to be a little more heavy-handed and done some things where I'll kind of randomly assign people in the groups. One time I was using playing cards and kind of said, well, if you get a diamond, you're this, and if you get a club, you're this. I find that works a little bit better at the freshman level, just because again you're also dealing with a bit more of the issues of kind of discomfort and immaturity and things like that I think they need a little more structure as well. But I've found that giving them those roles can sometimes help kind of move things along. And I think I saw in the chat that Amy also said she was kind of going back and forth on the idea, that question of evaluations as well from groups. Amy, are you doing kind of semester long kind of groups or smaller?
Yeah, so I think this is a good place to also ask a follow-up question. So I had, for one of my classes, and this is my third time running this class in this way, where they do have a semester-long project, group project. These are graduate students in public health. And so part of my question, and this is my first semester where I've kind of had to think about how to approach kind of accountability and individual grades as part of the group assignment. And so my question is, how do you think about, because I tell them, as it's written in the syllabus, that their grade as a group, that's everybody's grade, it's shared. They have to actually pick their own roles and responsibilities, and that's actually part of the final paper. They need to include that table and how, who was in charge of what, how they came up with those roles. And now that I know for certain that certain people aren't holding their weight this semester, but I'm kind of we're about midway through, and I'm getting the sense that some folks might not be. And so I've said, well, if there's a part of the paper that you were assigned to and it's not up to par, then that person's grade could be adjusted. But I don't have kind of a hard and fast way to deal with that, because I haven't had that issue. And like I said, this semester, I'm just kind of and again, they don't tell on each other, even as grad students, so I'm just kind of picking up on little cues here and there, that there might be communication or other things kind of falling apart. So anyway, just wondering how you kind of maybe incorporate accountability or maybe group evaluations as part of their actual grade, as at an individual level.
Can I ask a question back?
Yeah.
Do you use, well, I guess maybe this is like a question or a suggestion, which may not be useful this semester, but if they're working on a final report paper publication, to make them use Google Docs, because then you can see the entire history of who wrote what when, and you can tell them that you can see that, which might just head off problems at the pass, because they know that you're going to see their work much more transparently. That just came into my head when you were talking.
Yeah, and they know, well, I think they're all working on Google Doc, or maybe they have their own individual thing and then they upload things to the Google Doc. But I can ask to have like actual access to that document. Because they'll sometimes like, but again, because what I've gotten, I think, have been individuals, and it's like, can you take a look at my, like, this is my section that I've written. So yeah, I can incorporate that as well. Because yesterday we met and I was like, do I do a poll? But I'm also, I don't want to approach it as like, this is like a penalty or I'm like mad at them or, you know, something, you know, to make it more of like a positive. And I like the suggestion about kind of that self-reflection piece. But yeah, trying to like stay ahead of things, because just like everybody said, some of them haven't met each other. We're only on Zoom. They don't turn their cameras on. And it's hard to kind of know how they're functioning as a group. And, you know, and a lot of it is based on how much they tell you, and they don't tell me a lot. So.
I also found that during class time, I had them do breakout groups and go into the Google Doc and work together on the Google Doc. And you can literally see who is working and who is not. Like you, as long as you have access, which I would say you should have access to that master document. And to say that you want to be able to help them, you want to be able to, you know, sort of offer feedback on structure, whatever. But then if you say, okay, you know, let's do some group work and, you know, during class time, and then you can literally see what's happening in that document real time.
Yeah, I do that a lot with, because I use like Google Jamboard and stuff. I think some of you have heard me talk about that. And again, I like that because I don't like going into their breakout rooms if I don't have to. I feel a little intrusive. And so I try to avoid doing that. But having them do the collaborative document, again, you can see who's actually working on that document, you know, and if only 2 people out of the group of 3 are actually working at the time, then I'll jump in there and I'll kind of check in and see what's going on, and that's just kind of me. I'm just a little less comfortable kind of jumping into their breakout rooms if I don't feel that I need to too much. But I think also I was gonna say, you know, I did some group work several years ago with the graphic novel class I do, and again we had them with different roles because they were creating comics, and so we had a couple of writers and artists and kind of producers, and we didn't do any kind of built-in evaluation, and like you said, they don't really kind of let us know up front if there's issues sometimes, but then we got a lot of comments at the end saying this was a real problem, right? And so I think if you can find some way to kind of check in with them, it's better to kind of catch those problems now than find out down the road.
And I think I've seen some online things that are like having students do self and other evaluation in group projects. Like I think some templates of this exist. I don't know where I'm pulling this from, God knows. But I'm pretty sure I've seen this because I'm pretty sure I've done it before. Very specifically, like at some point, be like, hey, we're gonna assess each other. Yeah. I'm losing the string. Sorry.
I've done that a little bit, and I'll talk about it at that April workshop. I don't have it kind of here to pull up right now, but again, because we did it was almost a semester long project, and so I was concerned about people kind of not helping out enough because it was a big portion of the project they were producing was a big portion of their final grade as well. And so one thing I did build in was over the course of the semester, I think like 2 in the middle of and then 1 at the end, each group member would evaluate the other group members. And then they would also evaluate themselves in terms of how they were helping out. And then I had it all kind of set up in Brightspace so that they were like adding the scores together. And that was kind of your grade at that point, right? And there was, I had some issues where one person would say, oh, I'm doing a great job. and then everybody else would say, no, they're not doing a great job, you know, so, but it let me kind of interfere along the way, right? But yeah, there are ideas out there that you can kind of, I stole that from somebody else I found online.
Right, and that there are points built into the evaluation.
Yeah.
So like if you do the evaluation, these are free points.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
If you do the evaluation, even if you don't give yourself top marks, you do pretty well. And as long as you've been a good group member, you're going to do fine. But if you're not showing up and everybody's giving you zeros, and then you give yourself top marks, you're still not going to do very well with, you know, so.
And then when you do those kinds of evaluations, then do you share that feedback with, you know, the other group members so that they see or know at least maybe generally what their other teammates might have thought about them?
Yeah, I did. And again, I don't have the stuff. I don't have the stuff with me to kind of show you how I did it. But I had it set up somehow in Brightspace so that they could see their kind of overall score, and so that they were aware that, hey, their teammates, but I don't even think they could see who said what, but it was kind of like they could see that their teammates were not giving them top marks for participation. So I'll make sure I kind of pull some of that stuff together for that April meeting. It was a little convoluted. I remember talking to Janice quite a bit because I was pushing Brightspace to the kind of logical limits of what I was doing. So, but it was possible to do.
But I also feel like you could just kind of like, if it's clearly one person or two people, you might say, hey, I think you think you're doing a good job, but here's where perhaps you might rethink the ways that you're contributing to this project. And not even really mention the feedback. Like obviously they know that's where it comes from, but like, let me give you some hints on how you take better notes on secondary sources and synthesize that material, or let me, you know, explain to you X, right? To just be like, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think often students think that they are doing a good job. Because they don't know what a good job looks like.
Right. Absolutely, which I think is the whole point, right? Which is, again, we're giving them the chance to learn this now, so that they don't, you know, struggle with that in the future when it's going to matter most to them. We've only got about 5 minutes left. I was going to ask kind of one. I don't know, philosophical question about this and see what your responses are. But what is the ideal small group size? Let me give you a little bit more flexibility. What's too small of a group and what's too big of a group for the kinds of stuff you all have been talking about doing?
I think 3 to 5 worked okay. I mean, I think most of my groups were 3 to 4. I wouldn't go any bigger than 5. I think 3 is fine, but yeah. I mean, I don't think it's too
4.
Small. Yeah, 4. Yeah. No, that's 3 or 4 is fine.
I think 3 sometimes can get because it's an odd number. You can end up with maybe an odd man out. You know, they can pair up, but 4. I like 4.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Hail? Have we not had enough hail? Really? Sorry. Tornadoes, hail. I'm done.
I don't know. At this point, if it's just like slightly cooler, I would be okay. I'm gonna go home. This is too hot.
Insane.
Well, I think that's a great point to for us to wrap things up. I want to thank you all for being here today. I want to thank Dr. Elizabeth Manley from the History Department and Dr. Stassi DiMaggio from the Chemistry Department for sharing their experiences, and our attendees as well for their questions and thoughts also. And then do keep in mind, if you are interested in some of this for some of the other kind of issues that come up with this, especially in kind of longer term projects, keep an eye out for that April 13th session as well. So thank you all, and stay safe with this crazy weather.
You too. Thank you so much. Good to see you all.
Bye.